Alrighty, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is Raph. Welcome down to Security Rabbit Hole to the latest edition of the Down to Security Rabbit Hole podcast. I'm coming at you during the holiday season here, hoping that you take a bit of a break from this Log4j hell you're probably all living through, and join me for a bit of story time today. I've got a great guest, and we've got no particular agenda other than tell you some very interesting James Bond style cyber stories. Hopefully, have a little bit of fun. And like I said, I promise to keep it light and fun for the holiday season. Hopefully, you're listening to this as you're heading out to see some family, or maybe closing up the office for the year. I hope you get to do that. Although the future is not very promising given the stuff going on out there. All right, no further ado, let's welcome my guest. You know what? I'm going to let him introduce himself because he's got a very unique background. And Betsy, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, Rafael. Thank you very much for having me. So my name is Bentsi. I'm one of the co-founders for Sepio Systems, and it's CMO. And I come from an Army intelligence background and in signal intelligence, dealing many years with rogue devices, rogue base stations, rogue access points, everything that has to do with hardware devices and their related risks on infrastructure. I've been working with the same group of founders for almost 30 years now. This is our third company together. The first two were successfully acquired by NASDAQ traded companies. One was in the cyber automotive domain. I have a nice story about that as well. And the other was in the cyber ICS domain. Nice stories over there as well. And Sepio System is the third company. And when we set forth on this endeavor, we've actually looked around and we've seen that there's a lot of security products out there and a lot of security startups out there, especially in Israel, where I come from. And what was common to all of them is that they all started their security aspect or security challenge from a given level. For the technical savvy audience, that will be the OSI layer model that will be layer 2 and above. So that means that you first need to see the device in order to actually follow it through and analyze its traffic and all of that. So you would need its MAC address and everything that relates to that device's personality. And obviously, if everybody's guarding the second floor and up, where would the attackers would come from? They would come from either the basement or floor number one. And that's exactly what happens. Now, for many years, the issue of or the topic of hardware-related attacks were mainly attributed to, as you previously suggested, like in the James Bond scenarios, like
Right.
state-sponsored activities, KGB, then FSV, MI6, Mossad, CIA, all of them, and
Yeah,
that
yeah.
was that was that was the case for many years. But this has shifted, and I think that tagging into the James Bond a metaphor, I think that the probably like in 2 or 3 years, the next James Bond would look more like Mr. Robot than the current James Bond, because now the skill set and the capabilities and the attack tools that are currently needed in order to tackle those large evil corporates or state-sponsored villains or things like that are more in the domain of Q than the domain of the handsome James Bond.
I tell you what, if the next James Bond, as you say, looks more like Doctor Robot than the previous Daniel Craig and Pierce Brosnan, Sean Connery type, I'm going to be thoroughly disappointed because my ideal James Bond. I don't know. Do you have a favorite James Bond before we drop in here? Because there's a big debate, right? Which one's
Um,
the best?
yeah, I think that Daniel Craig was a good choice. The old school also, my favorite was Goldfinger, so I'm
Okay,
I'm a
okay.
huge fan.
I'm a Pierce
When
Brosnan guy.
everybody uh, I think that as a technology savvy kid who adored James Bond movies, I think the highlight moment of of the film, of every James Bond film, was that Q moment, where he would introduce all those gadgets and everything,
All the
and
awesome
not all
things.
the
Yeah.
yeah, and you would always look at it and you say, "Wow, that's nice. That's like a hovercraft, or that's like a very unique watch or a pen." But and you've seen that in recent, I think in recent James Bond movies, I think that they focus less about the gadgets because currently technology has picked up the pace, and you can
Yeah.
buy various devices that would give you a very good battle for technology achievements.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why I think that hardware attacks, that's the way to the future, both in movies and obviously in real life, and we've seen that. And this is from for a very obvious reason. If you well, as a cybercrime syndicate or as a state sponsored activity, you need to get into a very highly secured bank. Okay, so I won't get into trouble. Let's say that it's a highly secured bank, that it's the data center of the bank. So it's like the most, like the holy grail of the bank, crown jewels, all the
Sure. Sure.
superlatives that you can add about it. And obviously, it is extremely heavily guarded. It's not connected, obviously, to the internet. It's buried somewhere like 10 floors down. In order to get down to it, you'll probably need to nuke that data center. But as every technology side that there's in place, there's a vulnerability, and vulnerability comes in two main aspects. First is the human factor, and the second is the technology and the supply chain risks. Now, if you look into the human factor, then obviously this would be similar to every kind of human-based intelligence activity that's been around, I think, for centuries and centuries. Every every human being has a weak point, and I always give an example of that everyone could be extorted or hacked or driven to do
Blackmailed.
something that in normal life you wouldn't do so. And
Yeah.
today it's quite easy. So let's say that I want to target a certain person in that side, then I'll go into his social media where it will show his favorites and where he hangs out and what he likes to do. And then I could send someone or a nice lady or a nice guy who will approach him, um, and eventually, at the end of that night, when this guy would be completely wasted due to alcohol or some enforced drugs, then I could have him pose in different pose with, let's say, uh, bringing in some a boy or a girl, then take a picture of him, and then the day after he would get a note that he could either
Mm.
be uh, brought out in public as a known pedophile, or he would only need to take this little USB stick and just put it in his boss computer or bring something into the data center, and that would be as easy as that. And people will fall for it because there's always the deer in front of the headlight of that moment where they panic and they will agree to do some crappy stuff. And you see that, by the way, in Mr. Robot as well, where that guy
Yeah.
puts that CD-ROM because he got panicked.
Right. Right. Right.
Now the other way, because you can't really count on that effect of having all that human infrastructure in place, is that supply chain. And supply chain, it becomes probably easier because if you could implant a device that will be completely rogue. It will either be a legitimate device that's been camouflaged with an implant in it, or it could be a legitimate device that you've added a certain functionality. Now, the level of sophistication is mainly related to the efforts of the entity that has forged this spoof device. Now, if you remember the Bloomberg story a while back, so that story actually panicked everybody because they were talking about supply chain at the chip level. Now,
Yeah.
determining if a certain chip is a rogue chip or not, once the device has already been fabricated, this is like really the holy grail of cybersecurity, because it is extremely difficult to understand that, because probably whoever got to do this, gone through all this effort and fabricating this specific silicon for this specific target, has a sophisticated triggering mechanism for it. So it
Yeah.
won't be transmitting all the time. It won't be emitting any suspicious data all the time, just according to a certain remote trigger.
Well, we've got cases like this, right? There was, I mean, gosh, going back into I want to say mid 2014, 2015. Was there was some security hardware that was purported to be, of course, manufactured in China, that they were worried about, that there was inserting something into the chips that wasn't supposed to be there, and people were doing like these organizations were doing like layer by layer silicon teardown to try to figure out what's it, like how is it constructed, what's in it, is it originally what it should have been, or has it modified. And you're right, that doesn't sound like an easy job.
Yeah, so for a state-sponsored level, this is something that is easily achieved. Sorry, Rafael, I've lost you for a minute, for a second. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, okay. So for the state-sponsored activities, these type of activities are very easy to achieve, and you don't need to count on my word on it. You could just go, I think, 15 years back into the Ant catalog that was leaked a while back. You can find it online, and you will see a variety of implants on chips and connectors and molded cables that actually provided the NSA with the tool set that allowed it to exfiltrate information upon a certain external trigger at the X band or something like that. So this technology has been around for many years, and it's been used by all entities around the world. You cannot exclude any country in that. And I think that the best evidence of the threat that this hardware-based attacks affects on has an effect on the world. You see, in for example, in the Section 889 B that the U.S. has with regards to restricted use of equipment that was made in China, and this is because mainly to the fact that people understand that they cannot fully validate the true nature of those hardware devices. So the only way to make sure that your security is actually completely ban them from use. Now, this would, provide only a partial solution, because what happens if you're, let's say, um, a Swiss um, a Swiss manufacturer of CCTVs, cameras for surveillance, and obviously you've seen that you can't use Hikvision modules because they are banned from in the use in because of Section 889. But what happens if you do use that module, and when you configure that device, you actually burn the identity of a different MAC address, so it will not show as a Hikvision on layer 2. It will not show as a Hikvision device, but it will show as a different device. And the only difference between that legitimate device and the contraband device will be that on the physical layer they will behave completely different. Now, going back into the previous remark, and let me show you something that we're going to film this video. We do a lot of kind of Mission Impossible videos, implanting vacuum cleaners or cables or things like that. So I hope you've seen that. And the next video that we're doing was actually following a pushback that I got from a CISO from one of the banks, and we were arguing after he said that his data center is completely fail proof against any cyber physical attacks. And my kids know that when someone tells me that it can be done, that's exactly the time to actually try it. And then when you look into to a data center, then you look for something that can easily go in and out, usually uninspected. And there is one device and there is one guy who can go in and out on a periodic base without being thoroughly examined. And the equipment is the fire extinguisher, and the guy is actually the guy who's maintaining those fire extinguishers in a data center, because every data center has an automatic fire extinguishing machine, which conveniently enough is close to the racks. So if you have a manipulated device that you want to exfiltrate information from, then what would be easier than just putting the device in the base plate of a fire extinguisher, which they're always like kind of an inch and a half of room there, because it's oval and the base is flat, so there's enough space there to put anything. Now, this would probably reflect the number of entities that actually scan those fire extinguishers, because no one scans them because they're full of lead, so you won't able to see almost anything there. And the guy who actually brings the fire extinguishers, comes in and out periodically, coming with his tool. So the demo is actually taking first manipulated the switch that will find its way to the rack, and then putting a fire extinguisher next to it, and then all the traffic flowing from the switch will go to the fire extinguisher. And then when that guy comes in and he needs to take the information out, then you don't want to change the fire extinguisher, which is now an asset, but you want him to bring in, let's say, a Makita, where the battery pack will actually be a manipulated device that will actually exfiltrate the information from the fire extinguisher. And it's completely legitimate to see a guy standing with a Makita, trying to tighten screws or something like that next to a rack. It will, especially if he's periodically maintaining that fire extinguisher. Now, the cool thing about this entire scenario, that it takes about $50 and probably a couple of hours of online trial and error in order to get this sort of capabilities. So think of how much effort has been put in the past, and how many millions and billions of dollars have been put in order to secure those data centers, where actually you can walk around them easily enough, because you go through the only place that is not as secured as the others, because layer 2 and above, everything is like mega secured. But on the physical layer, and on devices that are actually uh, perfectly spoofing devices, that would be a great weapons of choice with regards to the adversaries. Another is interesting story, again from a different meeting that I had. I went into this fancy conference room of a law firm, and they had this great screen there, and I asked them. They had a smart TV, obviously, and I've asked them, uh, "What about the Wi-Fi in the TV set?" And then the CISO jumped in and said, "Oh, we have that disabled," and I was obviously very intrigued about that. And I opened up the remote, and surprisingly enough, the Wi-Fi enable button was on disable mode, which was fine. But then when you come with the external keyboard, or you come with a rubber ducky tool that actually impersonates as a keyboard, the first command that you actually do is enable Wi-Fi, yes. Enable debug mode, yes. And you
Yes, yeah.
enable you enable all the functionality, which eventually allowed allowed us to actually upload a screen grabber on that TV set and exfiltrate that information, all the captured presentations and videos. Everything was captured locally on the TV set, and then exfiltrated using the Wi-Fi connection of that TV set. Now, if 20 years ago you could send someone to cut off antennas, or glue some stuff, today a lot of the chips, the antenna is the chip itself. So
Mm.
how do you disable that? Do you come with a soldering iron and try to pick up those components? You might do it in the NSA headquarters, or other sensitive sites, but you can't do it in a commercial environment. And these law firms, for example, um, have significant valuable data, because probably they're the ones to know before everyone about a coming M&A activity, or a quarterly reports. So let's say that the reports 2 days in you know uh, ahead of everybody, then there's a lot of financial gain to be made there. And the
Serious
only thing
financial
that
gain. Yeah.
yeah, and the only thing that you need to do is have that cleaning lady plug a thumb size device to the back of the TV for count till 10, and that's it.
Well, you know what's
So
interesting? I find this has been the topic of many of these types of discussions where you have um, these devices. Smart TVs are the perfect example. Uh, there's a kiosk when you walk in and you can register yourself. Self-register, get yourself a printed badge. There's a TV that's playing the company news or whatever, and they're always they're always Android, right? They always have Wi-Fi somehow enabled or enableable, and you can always get through them. If not back into the network, then use them as a surveillance tool, and use them to do damage back to the organization. But that's interesting. The fire extinguisher story kind of. I thought you were going to go somewhere else with it. I thought you were going to use like the cleaning crew or building maintenance. But you went to the fire. I don't think I would have ever stopped somebody coming in to change out a fire extinguisher, or hey, the fire alarm, I need to change that unit out. I'm going to need to plug this in. I need to do some configuring. I mean, that's a great place to put a device that'll do massive packet capture over Wi-Fi, right? Inside, you put some memory. It's already plugged into the power. It can broadcast. Good stuff.
yeah, and I think some of the misconceptions, again, not in the professional agencies, this is not the case, but you know sometimes you have the perception that the attackers are like these pimpled teenagers, with the hood, and they sit in a dark room. And that could be the case in those, like massive ransomware campaigns, when someone got a hold of a certain ransomware code that could be distributed. And if you've been misfortunate enough to be on that email list, then you might have gotten that message with that, eventually leading to a ransomware attack. But when you're talking about the sophisticated attacks, and hardware-based attacks are usually sophisticated attacks. So
Yeah.
that means that there will be tools for a reconnaissance purpose. There will be tools for actually releasing the tool, actually doing the damage, backtracking covering your backtracks and everything. So it will be a sophisticated attacks, and the attackers will always know what you have. And let's say, I'll give you an example. Let's say that I want to know, what type of a security you're using in your facility, okay, or in your home, and then I might call you for an interview, Rafal. I'll do this kind of very highly lucrative job post, or even send out a headhunter after you, saying, look, there's this cool company, and then I'll ask you, okay, Rafal, so uh, let's say that I want to set up an audio studio. What would be your recommendation for the equipment that I should use? Now, probably your recommendation, your suggestion will be from your prior experience. So you'll
Yeah.
be probably recommending, the headset that you're using, or things that you've seen in the past. Now, let's take it into the security domain. So let's say that I'm now interviewing you for a network manager, network security manager, and then I'll ask you, okay, Rafal, show me what is considered, by your opinion, to be best practices with regards to network security. Now, obviously, the best network security that you feel comfortable with and you have the full details on is the one that you currently work on. So you will probably share the details of your existing network security scheme. So, in a single job interview, you can get a lot of data out of naive or unsuspecting employees. Um, so there's always those two. There's the internal abuser and the supply chain attacks, and there was an incident, if you recall, a couple of weeks back with that Navy engineer guy and his wife. He was working on
Yeah.
a
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
nuclear lab,
Yep.
and this guy was fully aware, and you see that in the Justice Department um, script of investigation, that he was fully aware of all the security measures. So he was doing everything in his power to actually go unnoticed. And eventually, he's a human being, and a human being will always find the way out of getting the data out of his enterprise, regardless of what type of security it's been affected there. And we see that a lot, by the way, because one funny story is that we had a company that had a very strict policy with regards to devices, especially storage devices. So they wouldn't allow any storage devices other than 5 sets of USB devices that were identified by their serial number. They were a kind of stored in a very secure location. So those were the only storage devices that were allowed. All the email activities of the employees were monitored to make sure that files are not exfiltrated. They've gone through all the best practices. And there was this guy who worked in engineering department, and he was about to leave. And what he did is that he brought in a small USB printer, and he actually printed all the patent applications and engineering schematics and all of that. And he actually took that with him. So there's always a way. And again, he knew that everything is monitored. So over time, each time he got to a different file, so it wouldn't look too suspicious of someone, just downloading a full folder of files. So we would take them one by one, so he wouldn't raise any, suspicion, and walk out with that under his hand. And there's a nice product. I think Samsung are responsible for that. That they did kind of a secured printing material, like standard A4 printing material that like in stores when you walk out and it starts, the alarm sets off. So if you would print out something in the company's in network printers, and then you would walk out of it from the facility, then you would sound the alarm. But again,
Wow.
you can do it only in certain places. So there's
That.
a there's always a way, assuming that there's a will. And I have a nice story for you as well. If you recall about my earlier comment about the automotive, that was before the Jeep incident, where everybody thought that
Uh.
cyber for cars is something, it's like science fiction. No one, who would hack your FM radio or stuff like that. And we were involved in a cool cyber security company for the automotive domain that was focused on doing firewalls for the ECUs in the cars.
Firewalls
And
for
it
ECUs.
was,
Yikes.
yeah. So now there wasn't any PR, and awareness similar to what we experience now in the hardware domain. And we wanted to do a very kind of impressive demo videos in order to get investors interested in the company. And we said, what would be more cooler than popping up an airbag without touching the car? And that was something we did. And the actual solution was very simple. simple. It was actually ridiculously simple because a lot of those devices were not manufactured or designed in a way that would prevent external signals messing around with the circuitry. So only the only thing you had to do, and that isn't really cyber, but that had the effect. Was actually playing around with some old basic signal transmission, but those signal transmission RF transmissions would actually mess around with the oscillating circuitry, and would bring the device into a kind of a unknown position where it would drive the pyrotechnics of the airbag and would pop it. And the use case behind it was like at that time there was those Toyota Prius incidents, and you said, from the side, you have the capability of popping up, let's say, 200 Toyotas in a given weekend. Then you know exactly what will happen on when the stock market opens up. So you can play on that. So there's impact on the classical terrorism, on economical terrorism. There's a variety of motivations.
Wasn't there a story a while back on there was a guy who was this is a long time ago, who was a disgruntled employee of one of like the LoJack styled car remote, engine kill kind of services. And I think the story was that he was fired or something, and he decided he was going to leave and like knock as many cars as he could off the road. People are driving to soccer practice with their kids in the morning. All of a sudden, their car goes into stolen cutoff state, and they're stuck on the middle of a highway with traffic whizzing by. I mean, that causes that kind of stuff causes some real danger.
Yeah, and think of it that the possibilities are endless, because every time you take your car, for example, for service, the first thing that they do is they connect you to a diagnostic a laptop that
Right.
provides the diagnostics. Now, think that if someone comes in, let's say the middle of the night, or a rogue or internal abuser, and implants or plays around, let's call it like this way, with that diagnostic PC, then he could actually infect all the devices that will be probed by that endpoint, and then on a given trigger, that could be a certain signal on the infotainment system. So for sending a certain text on the RDS, and once that's detected, then you could make the car stop, or you could do a whole lot of damage. And you always need to remember that uh, at all time you need to have full respect to the adversaries, the guys that we need to confront with, and our adversaries are always smart. In most cases, they will be one step ahead of us because they have a variety of attack vectors, and we need to guess which one will be the dominant or the relevant one. So in most cases, they will have the preliminary advantage, and it's up to us to keep up with them, which is a huge challenge. But these guys are smart. We've seen things that they've done which were very creative, and you think of it, oh, how didn't we think of it? And they're creative and they're motivated, so it's a significant and a meaningful battle between darkness and light.
Yeah, especially when it goes down to that hardware level. I mean, look, we can look at software, and there's analysis tools, and there's MD5 hashes, and we can do all kinds of inspection. But when it comes down to a piece of hardware, a microchip, the ECU on my car, the OBD2 sensor on my car, the various other things, my thermostat that controls the temperature in my house as it gets kind of cooler, the alarm systems that many people have in their homes that are set up on wireless signals, right, on cellular. It's very interesting to try to figure out what is going on at the hardware level there, and how that's impacted by attackers. whether it's targeting a specific person or something else at scale, or maybe even, a nation state or some kind of cybercrime, whatever. There's a lot of possibilities there. So, wow, we have completely run out of time. I want to thank you for joining me on the show. It has been truly interesting. And yeah, I've learned quite a bit here. The fire extinguisher one's going to stick with me for sure.
Yeah, so stay tuned because that will be our next Mission Possible. So stay tuned to that. And
Okay.
you and all the audience, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And despite everything that I've said, rest assured that probably most of your holiday gifts are legitimate, and it's up to you to discover those who are not.
All right, Betsy, thank you for joining us, folks. Thanks for listening. This has been a holiday edition of the Down to Security Rabbit Hole
Thanks, Eurofile.
podcast. Did a little story time, having a little bit of fun. Check those devices, and we'll see you another time, another place on yet another Down to Security Rabbit Hole podcast.